There are towns in America so quiet that people stop locking their doors. Hartford, Wisconsin was one of those places. A small city where neighbors knew each other by name, where generations of families had settled and stayed, where the idea of violent crime felt like something that existed somewhere else, in some other kind of world. Not here. Not in a place like this. Jessie Blodgett had grown up inside that sense of safety, and she had filled it with music. She was 19 years old and already the kind of person that leaves a mark on everyone she meets. A sophomore at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, studying theatre, holding a talent scholarship in musical education. Piano, voice, violin, songwriting, performance. Any creative outlet Jessie touched, she poured herself into completely, and that was never something anyone pushed her toward. She had always been that way since before most children could even sit still long enough to practice a scale. Her first-grade teacher had built an entirely separate curriculum just for her. While other kids in the class were sounding out simple words, Jessie was spelling things like metamorphosis. Not because she was showing off, simply because that was where her mind already was. Her parents never had to ask her to practice. The harder question was ever getting her to stop. By the time she reached 19, Jessie had built something real in Hartford. She had her studies, her performances, her causes. She taught piano, voice and violin to almost 30 young students, a business she had grown herself in just a few months. She volunteered summers at the local school orchestra. She campaigned for sustainable living, for environmental awareness, and increasingly and passionately for the issue of violence against women. Her dream was to become a choir director, believing genuinely and without irony that music had the power to change the world. That was Jessie, someone who made you feel, when you were talking to her, like you were the only person in the room. July 14th, 2013 was a Sunday that had everything going right. Jessie was playing the Fiddler in Fiddler on the roof at a local production, and it was opening weekend. Every seat had been full. The audience had been on their feet. The energy backstage after the final bow was exactly the kind that makes performers remember why they do it. And when the night wound down, the cast gathered for a pool party at a house with a sprawling llama pen outside, which said everything you needed to know about Hartford. Jessie was photographed that night with the llamas. She was smiling. She looked happy. By all outward appearances, it had been a perfect day. But when she got home just after 1 in the morning, her mother Joy noticed something was off. Jessie was quieter than usual, a little withdrawn. She told her mother that some of the guys from the cast had been making her uncomfortable. 2 men, both fellow cast members, both in their 40s. One had tried to pull her onto his lap. She told Joy she did not understand why men always had to take something that should have been warm and friendly and twist it into something else. Before going to sleep, Jessie wrote in her diary. She wrote that she felt like something was being corrupted, that certain men were taking what should have been platonic and turning it into a competition. She ended the entry by writing that she would recognize problems and confront them without fear, and she asked for God to be with her. Then she closed the book and went to bed. Joy checked on her at 8 the next morning, cracking the door to leave some clothes in the room. Jessie was still in bed, completely still. After a busy summer of performing and teaching and working, it made perfect sense that she would sleep in. Joy left for work and let her rest. She came back home around lunchtime to find the house completely silent. Jessie had a piano student scheduled for 12:30. The student knocked on the door. Joy called upstairs. Nothing. She climbed the stairs and pushed open the bedroom door. Jessie did not move. Joy said her name. No response. The bed, which was usually messy the way a busy 19-year-old's bed tends to be, was completely clean and neatly made. The blanket was wrapped around her daughter with a kind of precision that felt immediately deeply wrong. Joy walked to the other side of the bed and tried to gently move her. That was when she saw that her daughter was blue. The 911 call that followed is one of the most devastating recordings in this case. A mother trying to explain to a dispatcher what she is looking at, while the reality of it keeps hitting her in waves. She describes her daughter's cold skin. She describes what look like strangulation marks around her neck. And underneath all of the words, underneath all of the frantic searching for the right way to say what she is seeing, is the sound of a woman whose entire world just ended. What investigators found when they arrived painted a grim and deliberate picture. There were ligature marks around Jessie's neck. There were deep abrasions on her wrists and ankles, consistent with restraint. Her hair and clothing were soaking wet, even hours later, suggesting she had been washed after she was killed. Her body had been positioned back into the bed with care, arranged to look like someone sleeping peacefully. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damage to doors. The house had not been broken into. Someone had walked through it, and underneath Jessie's bed, investigators found a roll of tape. The marks on her body matched it exactly. The tape had not belonged to the family. Someone had brought it with them. Everything about the scene pointed away from a stranger and towards someone who knew the house, knew the layout, knew the family's schedule, and knew that Jessie would be home alone that morning. The staging, the washing, the careful repositioning of her body. This was not panic. This was someone who had time and who used it. One investigator noted that Hartford had not seen a homicide in nearly 3 decades. Jessie's father, Buck, would later say that in the 100 years before his family moved there, the town had recorded only 2 murders. Jessie was the third. Investigators moved quickly through Jessie's immediate circles. The 2 men she had mentioned from the cast party were interviewed. The 46-year-old who had pulled her onto his lap denied any involvement and was more concerned about what his girlfriend might think than about the seriousness of the situation he was being questioned in. Phone records for both men placed them well away from the house on the morning Jessie was killed. They were cleared. People from her work were also spoken to and cleared. The trail seemed to cool almost immediately. At the same time, parallel investigation was quietly developing in nearby Richfield. A woman named Melissa had been out walking her dog in a park just days before Jessie's body was found, when she was attacked from behind by a man holding a knife. She grabbed the blade herself and fought him off. He fled in a van. She needed 15 stitches. Melissa turned out to be, by every account, the most precise and composed witness investigators had encountered. She could describe everything. His age, his height, his weight, his hair colour, the plaid shorts he was wearing, the make and model of his vehicle, a dark blue Dodge Caravan, older model. The detective working her case said she was the best witness he had ever interviewed in his career. One officer recognised the vehicle description. He had seen a van matching that description in the park's parking lot some weeks earlier. Something had felt wrong about it at the time. He had run the plates. Nothing alarming had come back, so he had moved on. Now that instinct he had pushed aside took on a completely different weight. The plates connected to a couple in their 40s. Neither of them matched Melissa's description. But their son did. Daniel Bartelt, 19 years old. Tall, fair, light blonde hair. A call was placed to Daniel. He said he would come in. Notably, he did not ask why. When officers called him, Daniel Bartelt was not at home. He was at Jessie Blodgett's house. He was at the memorial. He was sitting with her friends, sharing memories, consoling her parents and crying. What almost no one in that room knew, and what investigators had not yet connected, was that Daniel and Jessie had a history. They had sat next to each other every day through high school. They had both been theatre kids, both musicians. They had written and recorded songs together. Just 2 months before Jessie's death, they had recorded a track and she had posted it to her YouTube channel. They had dated for several months, and even after Daniel ended things, they had stayed close. Their friendship had continued comfortably, at least on the surface, right up until the weekend she was killed. Daniel had dropped out of college after a single semester. When he came home, the people around him noticed a shift. The outgoing, jokey, easy presence they had known seemed to have been replaced by something quieter and more withdrawn. Jessie had noticed and she had been concerned. When Daniel came back into the friend group and started spending more time around her again, it became an open, understood thing among their circle that while Jessie had been happy to stay friends, Daniel wanted more. She was not interested in rekindling the relationship. She was content. They were better as friends. When Daniel arrived at the police station, he was calm, almost too calm. Asked about his movements on the day Melissa was attacked, he said he could not remember the specifics. Detectives walked him through it patiently. He had some marks and cuts on his hands. He said they were from work. When pressed, he admitted he had lost that job some time ago. So where had the marks come from? Daniel went quiet.
He was getting caught in small lies, each one pulling up the next. Eventually, he admitted what the detectives had already established. He had been in the park that day. He had been driving the van. And then came the reason he gave for attacking Melissa. The statement that made the detective interviewing him feel something primal and visceral go through him. He said he wanted to scare someone because everyone else seemed so confident, and he did not understand it. He wanted someone to feel the way he felt. He was placed under arrest for the attack on Melissa, but the interview did not stop there. Detectives began asking him about his day more broadly, working through his timeline. He mentioned he had been at the Blodgett house, at the memorial. They said they were sorry to hear that. Were you close? Daniel dropped his head and said he could not believe that someone had raped and murdered her. The room changed. At that point, Jessie's body was still being examined. No official findings had been released. No one outside of the investigation knew she had been sexually assaulted. Not the public, not her friends, and not the detective sitting across from Daniel at that moment. He had just described what happened to her in exact terms that no one else knew yet. While Daniel had been at the memorial, Joy Blodgett had turned to him and told him not to worry. She told him they were going to want to speak with all of Jessie's friends and everything would be fine. He had nodded. He had told his friends to come and collect him in about 30 minutes because he figured it would be a quick conversation. When his friends pulled up outside the police station, officers were already waiting. They were told Daniel could not be released. He was being detained. He's being detained. The evidence that followed was overwhelming in both its volume and its clarity. Surveillance footage placed Daniel at a park near the house on the morning of Jessie's murder. Officers went there and checked the bins he was seen visiting on camera. They pulled everything out. Inside a cereal box, they found rope, bloody tissues, and the same tape used to bind Jessie. A search of his home turned up more rope and more tape. DNA from both Daniel and Jessie was recovered on all of it. His DNA was found under her fingernails on both hands. Additional forensic evidence confirmed the sexual assault. His laptop opened another dimension entirely. The search history documented an escalating pattern stretching back over time, serial killers ranked by number of victims, methods of strangulation, spree killers, snuff films. Among the videos found on the device was one titled "Poor Girl Raped and Strangled to Death." It depicted exactly what had been done to Jessie with a precision that was not coincidental. The same sequence of events, the same staging afterward, washing, the positioning, Also on the laptop were portions of what appeared to be a novel written under the name Joseph Bartelt, Joseph being Daniel's middle name. Sections of the story featured a character called Jessica. Another character, referred to as D, was depicted beating someone into a coma. On the day Jessie died, Daniel had attempted to delete a file on his computer called Jessie's Song, the recording they had made together 2 months earlier. The file was recovered from the deleted data. He had brought a kit to her house. The prosecution would call it that directly. Everything he needed, carried in with him through a door he knew how to access, at a time he knew the house would be empty except for her. Daniel pleaded not guilty and the case went to trial. His defense team worked to frame the evidence as circumstantial, argued alternative explanations, suggested contamination. But there was no alternative theory that held together. The evidence spoke in one direction, clearly and without interruption. Clearly and without interruption. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty. First-degree intentional homicide. Life without the possibility of parole. For the attack on Melissa, an additional 5-year prison sentence, a term that was widely considered inadequate by those who had followed the case. At sentencing, Daniel spoke. He was calm and composed in a way that unsettled the room. He told Buck and Joy that he could not give them the answers they were looking for. He said he had an innate ability to lie to himself and that he had exercised it far too many times. He spoke about the evidence, acknowledging that he could not refute it, but stopped short of admitting guilt directly. He said he had wanted to accept sentencing through an Alfred plea, a legal mechanism that allows a defendant to accept punishment while maintaining they did not commit the act, and claimed he had only gone to trial because that option was not made available to him. He said he would not be releasing himself from his own conscience, that there was no hiding in a small concrete cell. He said he loved them and he was sorry for their loss. Buck Blodgett stood up and said 3 words that very few people in that room would have been capable of forming under those circumstances. He said he forgave Daniel, not because of what Daniel had done, not because of anything Daniel had said, but because forgiveness was something Buck had decided to carry as a practice, as an ongoing daily act, even when it made him angry, even when the grief of thinking about what Jessie went through made it nearly impossible. He told Daniel that forgiveness would never truly arrive until the truth did. That as long as Daniel was alive, that chance remained open. What grew out of Jessie's murder in the months following her death began with 500 people gathering in a park for a vigil. It grew into something with a name, the Love is Greater Than Hate Project, a nonprofit founded by Buck and Joy with a mission built entirely around ending interpersonal violence and promoting forgiveness. They take Jessie's story into schools, colleges, and prisons. They speak to people who are still inside the patterns that produce moments like the one that took their daughter. Jessie's last cause in life, the one she had been most vocal about in the year or two before she was killed, was male violence against women. Buck has spoken about how she tried to talk to him about it, how he listened but admitted he did not fully understand it until it arrived at his own door. Now it is the work that gives his days shape. He has said that every moment he is not doing it on purpose, he is in pain. And every moment he is talking about love and forgiveness, he is okay. At sentencing, he was given a few minutes to speak, and he used them with precision. He said that he would never again end a hard day with a walk around the block with his daughter, talking freely about everything under the sun. He said she had started every one of those walks in her final month the same way, turning to him and asking, "So how was your day, Dad?" He said the pain is always there, in the background or in the foreground every second, and it will never go away. Others have told him he will adapt, that he will learn to function inside it, and he says he believes them. He is already doing exactly that, but it remains, and it always will.